What is good, everyone? This is your host, Deanna Radescu with Label Free. To live your best life, you must live label free. And we're back with another incredible guest. So sit back, relax, and tune in. My next guest is a former entrepreneur, former alcoholic addict, now neuroscience coach and educator. He helps others improve their lives through neuroscience. Please welcome George Haymaker. George, welcome to the show.
Hey, Deanna, thanks. So great to be here. Hi, everyone.
Great to have you. Now, I think I've only had maybe one other conversation around neuroscience. So it's been a while. I know that much. And I really kind of want to hear, well, we want to learn a little bit more about what that is, but let's hear about what got you into this new expertise, this new realm of being an educator and a coach around neuroscience, because you haven't had exactly the most linear path. Was that a good
Uh,
way to put it?
that's a fair statement. I don't think any of us alcoholics and addicts quite have linear paths. They're typically pretty bumpy. But yeah, so I got fascinated with neuroscience during my recovery process.
Okay.
I was obviously hitting a hard bottom, and I just had to ask myself, how did I get here, and how was I going to get out of it? 50 years old, just in a messy state. And my wife had left me, my puppies were scared off. And so I had to do some serious soul searching. And so, I started down this path of recovery and self-discovery. How did I get there? What had happened to me? Was change even possible? What did change look like? And I got into AA and I started, in the 12-step program, but it really wasn't enough for me. I needed to understand at a deeper level, what happens to an addictive brain, and
Yeah.
what did this change process look like? And the more I learned, the more I realized that all change is possible, and it happens in the brain. So I'm just the kind of person that wants the know-hows and whys and wheres and all of that. It helps me get my arms around it, and it helps me make sense of it.
Sure.
It's not enough to just tell me, "Hey, go do this." I need to know why and what it is I'm trying to accomplish. I think that's the entrepreneur in me. So that's what led me down the path, and then I said, what a waste it would be if I just kept all this information to myself. Why don't I share it with others? And so that led me to get my certifications in coaching. And frankly, neuroscience coaching is the only scientifically backed coaching methodology around transformational, deep level, second order change that doesn't just address the surface level behaviors, but it actually shifts and changes who we are as people into
Okay.
some different version of ourselves. And while we're doing that, the brain actually reorganizes itself. The neurons, the mapping of how the brain's organized actually changes, which therefore sets a new foundation for how we can be in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there is more that you have to take a scientific approach if you're going to completely change your habits and, bad habits at that to create a better future for yourself. I want to just number one highlight. Can you please let the people know how old you are now? Because how long ago is that?
Yeah, so that was 12 years ago, and I'm 64. So 52.
Amazing. It looks amazing. If you're listening to this, go check out the video. You're going to be shocked when you look at this man.
Yeah.
Now let's rewind even further. Now, did you going through this whole process and becoming a coach around neuroscience and being an educator, did you learn what those triggers were that made you fall into an addiction addict type of mental state?
Yeah, sure did. And that's what, I take everyone back to that I work with during the coaching process is it's very important to become aware of how we ended up in this place because then we can make sense of it. And we recognize during this process that we're not broken, that we're not somehow defective.
Yeah.
We are as we are because of the experiences we've had in the past. So by and large, you will find that most everyone that becomes addicted to substances, behaviors to cope, they are medicating psychological, mental discomfort. Usually it originates during childhood.
Yeah.
And the reason childhood is so influential on how we end up being as adults is because our brains aren't fully developed at that point, and we are just open to whatever happens in our environment becoming imprinted on our brains. And as a matter of fact, the front part of our brains, the thinking part, the prefrontal cortex, which helps us with impulse control, evaluating whether things make sense or not, uh, using judgment to decide whether something's a good idea or not.
Yeah.
That part of our brain does not start to develop until the age of 6 and does not fully develop until the age of 25.
Wow.
So bad things are happening as you're growing up. Those experiences go directly into your subconscious, into your back part of your brain, and begin to imprint as neural pathways in your brain. And if they're uncomfortable, if they feel like they're threatening, and you feel like your survival is at stake, which the brain is, that's the number one job of the brain is to protect us, then it resonates that your experiences were your survival was threatened, then you grow up with these patterns being very uncomfortable in your own way of being. And so what happens is if you have uncomfortable experiences early on, you take those with you into adulthood. If they're not addressed and dealt with,
Yeah,
then they show themselves in adulthood as all different types of behaviors that are uncomfortable and don't serve us well.
for sure. And so I mean, I've had my own fair share of trauma, and it's taken a long time to really kind of reframe my way of thinking on how I react to certain things. Maybe
Yep.
it's some of the neuroscience, maybe I've like taught myself, I don't know, but I definitely did. I call it self-medicating. When you are dealing with a lot of those traumatic things and you don't have an outlet or know how to deal with it or what have you, that you start self-medicating. I did. I jumped on the party train. I was like, woohoo, let's just go. Luckily, I didn't get too far out of control because it didn't like the way that made me feel. So I had that, like, I was able to check myself. But I think that a lot of people kind of get caught into that vicious cycle of the self-medication, and they don't know how to, number one, admit that there's an issue they need to deal with, or number two, how to get off that train because it's something that they've gotten used to doing.
Yeah. Um, So again, our brains are reflections of all of our past experiences. So you brought up your case. So all those experiences you had early on that made you feel uncomfortable later on, were represented in your brain as connections of neurons. And so they're patterns. They're actually physical representations of those experiences. And so, yeah, that's why they're stuck with us until we
Yeah.
do something to change them or weaken them or replace them with something different. And so that's exactly what happens. And then along the way, we decide if we're going to cope with healthy mechanisms or unhealthy mechanisms. So,
Yeah.
in the case of myself, I coped in an unhealthy way using addictive substances. And you're right, that very much creates its own pattern that your brain begins to recognize that every time it's uncomfortable experiencing negative thoughts, emotions, and other types of mental activity, that it can go to a substance and get relief.
Yeah.
And so the brain that creates a pattern that grows very strong, and it's made further strong by the fact that there's so much dopamine being released in the brain when we
Mm,
use addictive substances and behaviors, far more than we can get any other way. So that's like pouring gasoline on fire. So these patterns are hard to break out of, these addictive patterns, because they're so well entrenched with such high levels of reward from dopamine
yeah.
that they're hard to break. And so that's when we're trying to transform somebody, we have to deal with addiction first, and then we have to deal with the underlying discomforts that got them to use and abuse substances in the first place.
Yeah, because I mean, the substance, it doesn't take away those feelings, it just numbs it temporarily. And I think that's what creates the addiction, like that addiction pattern, because you need more and more and more to keep the numbing up so that you don't feel those uncomfortable feelings or those uncomfortable thoughts or those things that make you feel like you're going to go into a spin, because your body's starting to build up a tolerance. And so, okay, now the alcohol was good, it helped me for so long, now I need something more because those thoughts keep creeping back in. And so it's like that addiction piece starts growing even like grows is growing even bigger and bigger because you're not dealing with those underlying issues.
Yeah, so the negative thoughts and feelings will keep rising.
Yeah.
You don't have any productive way to deal with them. And to your point about tolerance, what happens is there's so much dopamine being flooded in the brain unnaturally. The brain's not built to handle that much. Just think about trying to push, 1,000 gallons of water through a garden hose. That's really what it's like. And what
Yeah.
happens with the neurons is they begin to uh, malfunction, and they no longer, parts of the neuron become damaged and they no longer can receive the dopamine. So the receptors, as they're called, begin to shut down. And what happens is we have to keep taking more and more substance to get the dopamine through the limited amount of receptors that are still
Uh,
available.
yeah.
And so that's what tolerance is that we're just destroying our the neurons in our reward network of our brain. And so we have to keep using more and more because we have to get the same feeling, we have to consume more and more. So it's just a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And then when we stop using, withdrawal happens because the dopamine goes from such an elevated unnatural level way back down to baseline and even below. And that precipitous drop in those neurochemicals makes us feel like crap. That's what a
Yeah.
withdrawal is that precipitous drop in neurochemical. And so, and we'll do anything to get back to that state of normal feeling, which no longer is not a human level. It's a elevated level based on these
Right.
drugs. And so that's what the vicious cycle is. And so yeah, coming off of that is uncomfortable. But then as we're doing that, we're beginning to shift someone to experience pleasure from other more natural, healthy pursuits, and that begins to rebuild the person's life. So it's a gradual shift.
Yeah. Now, what is, I guess, what's your target client? Are they a lot of, are you dealing with a lot of people that are in this addiction phase and looking to get help, or they're just at a point in their life where they're ready to deal with some of that trauma because they keep making, or their life keeps on repeating itself and creating bad patterns, I guess. Because I think that creating bad patterns, making bad decisions is almost equally as bad as being an addict, right?
Yeah. So again, the addiction piece is just something that's on top of the underlying
Right.
negative, unhelpful, unwanted thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And so I deal with people in and out of addiction,
Okay.
but everyone I deal with has these underlying uh, negative feelings, thoughts, actions, behaviors that are not serving them well individually, internally, but also having consequences on other parts of their life. It may be stalling them out in their career. They're not
Mm,
good with people in their company. They just don't respond well, behave well. They don't form relationships well. They don't maintain them well. Again, all of these things originating in childhood.
yeah.
Um, I deal with, so a lot of working professionals. I deal with college students that are
Oh,
struggling with
wow.
identity issues, self-confidence, self-doubt,
Yeah.
again, largely originating from childhood. And they may or may not be using substances to cope, but they just want to shift out of these negative ways of being into a different version of themselves. And it's what you have to do is tap really deep inside the person into their constructs of their identity, their value systems, really what's important to them, how they'd like to be. We spend a lot of time around envisioning that new person,
Yeah.
establishing an emotional connection to them, feeling the reward of what it would be like to be them, and then start doing daily practices to help them begin gradually through a lot of repetition, begin to experience that new person. And it's like any other habit, you have to practice it. The
Yeah.
longer you do, the more reward you get from it, the more your brain wants to keep pursuing it.
Hmm. So, with anything, when you're trying to create a positive, lasting change in your life, it doesn't come easy, right? And I think there's a lot of people, and I'm just speaking just from stories I've heard, people that I know, family, friends, that I've seen over time, like how they are with themselves and some of their experiences. It sometimes can be hard for you if someone says, I need help, but they don't, they're coming to you, I need help. But there's got to be some resistance in wanting to really deal with those core issues and coming to a point where they're actually allowing themselves to be aware of what it was that put them on the path that they're on.
Yeah, so it's not just them that's resisting, it's their brains.
Right, right,
And
right.
that's
Okay,
what
so the
they're,
brain is resisting. Yeah.
yeah. And I know that makes logical sense, right? I mean, we are our brains.
Right.
But the reason for that is because the brain loves familiarity. Even if it's painful, it has experienced in that displeasure that it will not kill you. The brain's number one job is to conserve resources, keep you safe and alive, so that you and your species can continue to survive, through the generations. And that's really its main job. And so even if you're living a life of discomfort and dissatisfaction and unhappiness, the brain says, well, sorry, but
Yeah.
I know I'm familiar with how you are right now. I know you're not going to die on me. So I prefer familiarity versus this unknown land that this
Yeah.
coach is trying to take you through. So that's why it tends to go back to familiarity. So we have to break out of that and consciously work together to take gradual baby steps day by day and start to build this new life and really focus on the reward. So what the brain also likes is reward. So if you can do things in this new life that you're going to build for yourself that are rewarding, starting with just little bits of reward at the beginning, and recognizing, celebrating that, experiencing, allow your brain to participate in that reward, then it'll say, okay, it's like wading into the shallow end of a pool. You
Sure.
dip your
Yeah.
toes in, the brain says, okay, that wasn't so bad. And it actually felt kind of good. So that's cool. Let's go do a little bit more and a little bit more. And then before you know it, you're weeks down the road and you're like, wow, I'm feeling different. And what's happened is you're no longer exercising those old patterns.
Yeah.
So they're beginning to weaken and go dormant. And you've built new patterns in your brain, new connections of neurons,
So
and they're starting
remapping.
to
Remap.
remapping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Neurons are actually shifting around in your brain.
Yeah.
There's 100 billion of them, by the way, in your
Wow.
brain. And so they're beginning to reform and reshape. You can see my background. Those are
Yeah.
actually connections of neurons.
I love
And
it.
so they begin to shift and move and disconnect and reconnect based on this new lifestyle you're setting up for yourself. And the brain begins to say, okay, this isn't actually bad. It actually feels better than that old way of being. So yeah, now I'm starting to get on board. But you have to stick with it, consciously, with commitment. Motivation and commitment are the two ingredients you have to bring with you to transformation. The rest can be taught. The rest can be coached. Um,
Sure.
but you have to keep with it. And some people say, well, how long does this take?
Yeah, that
The
was gonna be
answer
my
is,
question. Like, what's like the average time of people starting to make those lasting changes or creating those remapping in their brain?
okay, depending on how motivated and how committed you are, you will
Yeah.
begin to see changes in weeks. And by the end of a 3 month program, if you're on it, and you'll have some setbacks,
Sure.
but you'll begin to notice some very significant changes in your way of being.
Yeah, no,
three
I
months.
love that. And what does it look like if someone wants to work with you? Like, how does that process? So if they hear this, they're like, wow, George, I'm really in alignment with George's message, what he's been through, what he's about, and I'm really digging this neuroscience. What does that look like if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, the website's georgehaymaker.com. And there's a link on there for discovery call,
Okay.
which is free for 30 minutes. We can sit there and chat. You can tell me about what's going on with you, your challenges. Everything is safe, confidential, trusting. I want people to understand I am their partner in this. There's zero judgment. Whatever story you have, I guarantee you, I've been there or
Okay.
someplace close. And so this is all about trying to help people see that change is possible and help them through the process. I love what I've been able to do with my life, and I just want to help other people achieve similar transformation.
I love that. And if someone is contemplating like working with you because they have possibly hit the bottom of the barrel, right? They've just hit rock bottom and then that's it. Why should they make this decision now to work with you?
Well,
Since
for
you've
anyone
been
like
there, since
me,
you've been there at rock bottom, like, like there's only one way to go but up. So why should they make that decision just to pull that trigger and say, you know what, I need to work with George?
well, if you sit back and think about where you've been and where you are, you know that addiction is progressive. There is no coming back from it. Addiction's undefeated, no matter how smart you are, how much wherewithal you have, how much money, size of your IQ, etc. You will never escape addiction. And so you can keep going, but it is going to go to that, the consequences are going to keep piling up.
Yeah.
And there will be a point where you either, it's like either, it's a come to Jesus point where it's either you're going to change due to consequences, you're going to change because of your own desire to change, or you're going to have something really bad happen.
Yeah.
And,
Or not survive, right? That's the
or not
alternative,
survive. Yeah,
you
correct.
know?
Left that one out.
Right.
And I was close to that point. I actually was in that,
Oh, wow.
killing myself mode when um, first responders were called and I, was
Oh,
taken to rehab. And so anyway, yeah, it's just not going to get any better, I assure you. So just let's go now.
yeah. And I think that your approach, I mean, there's many different ways to deal with past patterns, but I think the neuroscience approach is probably a much more impactful approach and more long-lasting change approach just due to like that it is based in science. That's my thought personally.
Couldn't have said it better myself. There's what's called first order change and second order change. The first order is very surface level.
Yeah.
It's similar to, let's say that you're stressed, you want relief from your symptoms, so you do some deep breathing and the stress goes away. Okay. That's
Yeah.
first order. There's a lot of coaching out there like that.
Sure.
Second order deep transformational change is, I'm feeling stressed. Well, that's okay. Let's stop the symptoms, but then let's deconstruct that experience that's causing you to be stressed at a very core level and find out what has caused, what's the causation around why you're stressed.
Sure.
And let's completely, it's like a house that is dilapidated and you're going to deconstruct it. You're going to take all the walls down, get down to the foundation, and figure out why that house became dilapidated. And then you're going to reform pour the foundation based on your
Yeah.
values, off the identity that you want to have,
Yeah.
off your core motivations, things that are embedded deep inside of you. And then you're going to begin to construct a house with all of your new thoughts, feelings, experiences, and so on this new foundation.
Yeah. New
So
stronger
it is
foundation.
stronger foundation, but it's at the foundation level
Yeah.
so that you don't have to keep dealing with this stuff over and over again. You have reconstructed your internal being.
Yeah, I love it. I know you already mentioned it once, but please, can you let the audience know where they can connect with you and learn more about you and just follow you and, if they are thinking about reaching out. So all your links, please.
Yeah, it's georgehaymaker.com is the website, and then I'm on LinkedIn. I don't have a big presence on Facebook and Instagram just because I'm an old guy and I never really got into that. So LinkedIn or the website.
Excellent. You guys, I'm gonna put those links in the show notes. So if you connected with George or you know someone that needs to connect with George, please put them or yourself and contact him, reach out to him on LinkedIn, go to his website, learn a little bit more, and don't be afraid. The time for change is now. So make it happen, especially if you're struggling with addiction and are reaching that point of rock bottom. We want to see you survive and just make the call. Just make it happen. It's 15 to 30 minutes out of your day. It can change your life indefinitely. George, it's the part of the show where I like to ask for last words of wisdom or advice. What would you like to leave with us today?
Yeah, just encouragement for everyone out there who's struggling. I feel your pain. I've been there. It sucks. Um, hope is at a scarcity, but I assure you that the brain is willing and wanting to change. It just needs your guidance. Think of it like you're no longer in the passenger seat being driven around by your brain. You actually move over to the driver's seat,
Mm,
put your hands on the wheel, and you can actually steer the direction
yeah.
of your brain. Okay, so it can happen. Just please get some help.
We love that. Yes. Get some hug. Get in the driver's seat and take control. Don't let that
Yeah,
little man talk shit to you because you have control more than you think. George, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your story, what you've been through, and now wanting to help people get past that rock bottom place in their life, whatever, if they're struggling with alcoholism, addiction, making bad decisions, just repeating those bad patterns. We need people like you to help people out there that may have gotten a little lost in their life, and it's never too late to get back on track. So thank you very much. We appreciate you.
my pleasure. Thank you so much, Deanna.
You're welcome. You guys, this is your host, Deanna Radescu with Label Free. To live your best life, you must live label free. As always, don't forget to subscribe, follow, rate, review, comment, share, all those good things. And I'll be back soon with more dynamic guests.